We continue to go further in the last chapter, Kaivalya Path. In exposition of word-to-word sutras, this second last session. After this session, we will have a last session. Once we end the last session of sutra by sutra translation with some psychoanalytic commentary, I will then have overall presentation on the whole of Yoga Sutras with a psychoanalytic commentary, which will be thematic and not sutra by sutra. So in all, we will have 21 sessions, 20 sessions of sutra by sutra, and one session overall. In fact, in 20 sessions, the first 2 sessions were overall thematic. And so if you look at this entire Yoga Sutra series, the first 2 presentations are overall thematic. Then we have 18 sessions of sutra by sutra commentary, and so we will have total 20, and 21st will be an overall psychoanalytic commentary on Yoga Sutras. So here he says, the whole framework of the mind and the world is held together on the laws of cause and effect. The law of the support and the supported, meaning the entity and the foundation on which the entity rests. Once this framework is dismantled, with dismantling of desire and I-ness, then tendencies also disappear. If you recollect in the last session, last sutra, Patanjali talked about in the last episode. In the last presentation, Patanjali talked about the transpersonal, primordial, eternal origin of all psychic entities. In fact, the same is true of all entities, psychic or otherwise, but we are limiting our discussion to psychic entities. And he says this framework of first there being a soul and the soul having this characteristic of I-ness, and around this I-ness, according to the nature of the soul, using the laws of nature, psychic entities are collected to create a structure. And this whole framework is essentially based upon desire and I-ness. So first is I-ness. So the soul comes into existence, develops a sense of I-ness, and then develops certain desires. And then according to that desires and the sense of I-ness it has. So based upon the nature of I-ness and the nature of starting point desires, psychic material is collected around the soul. Then the biological and physical material is collected around the soul. And the whole human integer comes into being. But this whole framework is based upon first at the core is I-ness and then desire. If these two are dismantled, then all other tendencies disappear and the whole structure becomes flexible, and much of the structure actually withers away or gets sublimated into only necessity or the principle of the self or principle of universe, synergetic to that. The past and the future exist in every moment since elementals take different values over time. So it is the same elementals which are taking different values constituting events and phenomena. The elementals are not different. In different proportions, different elementals come together, take different values to create an event. What we call an event is nothing but elementals taking different values and coming together in different proportions, giving rise to different results. And therefore, Patanjali says, the past and future exist in every moment. Logically also is true. The present is neither independent of the past, nor is the future independent of the present. So in the present, based upon what it is, its influence will create a future. And the present is created because of the influence of the past. So one of the elements in present is influence of the past. One of the elements in future is influence of the present. And therefore, they are not disjointed independent entities, but they are related to each other. And across all the three, it is the same elementals which are involved in all events. They, past and the future, can be manifest or subtle based upon the qualities. So based upon the qualities of the person or qualities of an event, qualities involved in an event, the past and the future can be manifest or subtle. We can see that in everyday experience also. If we look at traditions, where we celebrate the same traditional festival every year, the same way, the past is very explicitly manifest. Or the way we deal with a guest coming from outside of the country, these are subtle qualities at play. The past is there, but in a subtle way. Uniqueness of personality arises from uniqueness of transformation of qualities. Just as everyone has a fingerprint, but everyone's fingerprint is different. Because the constituents of the fingerprint are different. Similarly, everyone has essentially the same elements. Everyone has the same motivations, same affects arising, same epistemological process. Everyone has anger, envy, pain, hatred. Just the quantity differs. And when something will activate or deactivate differs. And when something is created, how it will be handled by the unconscious mind, defenses, that differs. So there is uniqueness, but uniqueness because of a unique combination of elementals, not because of elementals being different. So everyone is constituted of the same elementals, just the proportion of these elementals and the way they are used in activation and deactivation in various events, that is different. So our uniqueness is not uniqueness of elementals, but the uniqueness of coming together of the elementals, that proportion and the relative relationship and activation and deactivation. It's like two buildings are different, not because one is made of water and one is made of wood. Both are made of concrete, but the way the concrete is used is different. The amount is different, the way it is different. Different minds and different personalities lead to different paths of life, even if two persons seem otherwise similar. The soul journey of each individual is different, even if two people are twins. So even if there is genetic similarity, the soul journey is different. The karmic load is different. And because the soul journey and karmic load are different, no two people pass through the same root. Everyone's root of experience in life is different. There can be commonalities, overlaps, but never 100% overlap. Everyone's path of experience is different. The story of life is different. So even though two people may look alike, their personalities and paths of life are different. God loves variety. So variety is a spice of life, not only for human beings, also for God. 177, Patanjali puts up a question. He wonders in a counterfactual, what can happen in existence if there is only one absolute whole? The play of universe can happen only when differentiation happens and independent entities, unique entities, they come into being, related, not independent, let me say autonomous. Autonomous entities come into play. If there is only one absolute whole, nothing can happen in the absolute whole. It's a static transcendence, eternal transcendence, but a static transcendence. For events to happen, different entities have to exist. If there is one entity, there can be no event, except for the except for the existence of that entity. Existence of that entity, the bliss of that entity. But it will not have the events which are there in the universe. So the universe of being, in the Heidegger sense, being with small b. The universe of being. Give me 2 minutes. Patanjali here also brings to focus that our thinking essentially is completely anthropomorphic. This goes as a priori in all human thinking, that human thinking essentially is human thinking. (178) Patanjali says, mind cannot know without influencing knowing of the object known. This is a thematic, meaningful translation based on meaning. If you look at the word to word literal translation, it says, mind cannot know without leaving a color or imprint on the object known. So Patanjali precedes Immanuel Kant by thousands of years. And he says, mind contributes as much to the object known as much the object itself does. And therefore, the mind cannot overleap the process of knowing. And therefore, there always will be a color and imprint of the mind as the mind tries to know any object. There is no way the mind can know without leaving a color or imprint of its own on the object known. And therefore, we can never know the thing in itself. However, we can know much of the object, not the whole of the object. So we say all necessary knowledge is not necessary. Knowledge possible is knowledge sufficient. This is epistemology, which is yet to come into psychoanalysis of the Kantian principles of how we know certain things. And this has deep implications on our understanding of part object, whole object, fantasy object, real object, the Oedipal object, good enough object, not good enough object. And that is where the constitution of the mind also comes in. Kleinans would easily agree to it, the mind coloring what we know. So Patanjali does not take any extreme position of subjective idealism or materialism. He says both of them are partly true. The mind colors or leaves its imprint, but the mind does not create on its own. So the object exists independent of the mind with its own characteristics, which we have seen in Sutras before. The Purusha, owing to its unchanging self, the observer, knows clearly the truth of the mind and also of itself, but not the other way around. The observing ego can look at the mind and understand the way it works, but the mind in turn finds it difficult to look at itself or look at the observer back. It is not natural. It is not natural for the mind to see itself in operation because it is geared to perceive objects other than it. The mind is not geared naturally to perceive itself or work on itself. The mind is geared naturally to work on objects outside and then on the objects inside, but not on itself. So this is the nature of the mind, that the mind primarily is based for objects outside. That is where our survival is depending on. So the first natural thing for mind to do is to work on objects outside for survival. Then objects inside for pleasure, attachment, and progress, but not on itself. So the spiritual progress where the mind has to work on itself is not natural for the mind. You have to follow spiritual discipline to really make the mind do it to the extent it can do it. But it's very difficult for mind to do it, and therefore normally it is the Purusha, that the observing ego, that observes the mind, understands the mind and transforms the mind, rather than something inside of the mind transforming the mind. Patanjali says it's not possible. I don't agree with it completely. I think it's possible, but it's not natural. And it's not easy. And it almost is like taking the Purusha into the mind to transform the mind. And this also brings into question, what do you call as the mind? (181). At any given moment, both perceptions cannot be held simultaneously. The perception of the object and the perception of oneself looking at the object. So either you are with the object or you are looking to oneself. You have one of the two objects. Either yourself as an object or the object as an object. You cannot do both. Very difficult for a mind to do. Patanjali is very clear it cannot be done. I have heard some people say it can be done, but it is not natural and it is anyway rare. So in general, what Patanjali says is definitely true. In some rare situations, some individuals may be able to pull it off separately. But as a general principle, what Patanjali says is absolutely true. And this also brings in psychoanalysis the question of observing ego and the participating ego. Very difficult for anyone to be both simultaneously. And this is very important in insight generation, different types of insight generation. So you have an ordinary knowing insight, ordinary cognitive insight, a really deep intellectual insight which has explanation into it, not just recognition of something as distinct phenomena, but explanation of it. Then the intellectual resolution, conviction, and transforming part, and then the emotional transforming part. So different types of insights are generated, and in that these processes are involved, where the observing ego is looking at the participating ego. So if we go deep into it, we can do those processes in psychoanalysis much better. One more session to go. I'll take a break and then we will rejoin.